Long before werewolves learned to hide beneath human skin, before vampires were given names, castles, and seductions, Eastern Europe whispered of something far worse. Not a creature cursed by the moon, not a man damned by a bite, but a being that was never human to begin with. In the deepest layers of Slavic folklore, beneath saints, beneath demons, beneath even the devil himself, there lingers the memory of a monster so obscene that history tried to erase it. Not because it wasn't real, but because it was too real. Beyond the familiar horrors of Baba Yaga's forest or the aristocratic vampire lies a creature that did not tempt, did not bargain, and did not transform. It hunted. Eyewitness tales, passed in whispers, not books, describe something emerging from the borderlands where villages ended and wilderness began. A towering humanoid figure, broad-shouldered, upright, familiar in shape, until you saw its face. A dog's head, elongated, snarling, dripping with hunger, iron teeth glinting in the dark, capable of crushing bone, one eye fixed forward, unblinking, a gait uneven, almost limping, yet impossibly fast. And what it sought was not livestock, not game, but human flesh. Children who wandered too far, travelers who crossed the wrong path, entire households that vanished without a scream. Its name, when it was spoken at all, was Psoglav. A being so savage that villages avoided naming it aloud, so blasphemous it shattered the boundary between man and beast, so terrifying that medieval storytellers softened its features or left it out entirely. Because Psoglav was not a fairy tale meant to entertain, it was a warning. And tonight, we tear open the folklore that tried to bury it. Tonight, we exhume the monster history forgot.
To understand Psoglav, we must begin with its name, because even the name carries fear. In the Old Slavic tongues, so means dog, and glava means head. Together, they form a blunt, almost brutal description, the dog head. There is no poetry in the name. No attempt to soften the horror. It tells you exactly what this creature is and what it is not. But Psoglav is not merely another dog-headed being like those found in distant medieval maps or travelers' tales. It is not a curiosity, not a mythic race, not a misunderstood humanoid. In the oral traditions of South Slavic folklore, particularly in what is now Croatia, Serbia, and Slovenia, Psoglav appears as something far more intimate and terrifying, a monster rooted in local memory, shaped by real fear. Witnesses describe Psoglav as having the body of a man, tall and powerful, moving upright like any human silhouette seen at a distance. But where a human face should be, there is only the elongated skull of a dog, jaws stretched wide, lips pulled back from iron or steel teeth, strong enough to crush bone. In some versions of the legend, Psoglav bears a single eye, fixed in the center of its forehead, unblinking and watchful, as if nothing could hide from its gaze. Others speak of a single leg, sometimes described as metal, sometimes as bare-boned, giving the creature an uneven, almost limping stride that only makes its pursuit more unsettling. Yet it is not Psoglav's appearance that made villages whisper its name in fear. It is what Psoglav eats. Unlike wolves or beasts of the forest, Psoglav does not hunt animals. It hunts people, travelers who take the wrong road, children who stray too far from home, entire households that vanish overnight, leaving behind silence and stripped bones. Psoglav is a cannibal, and in the moral universe of Slavic folklore, cannibalism is the ultimate transgression, the final proof that something has fallen completely outside the human world. Psoglav does not speak, it does not reason, it does not seduce, curse, or deceive. It does not need to. Psoglav hunts. And in doing so, it reminds us that the greatest monsters in folklore are not those who pretend to be human, but those who once were, and chose to become something else entirely. After understanding what Psoglav is, the next question becomes far more unsettling. Where does such a creature belong? In Slavic folklore, Psoglav is never described as living deep within a village, nor fully lost in untamed wilderness. Instead, it is always said to dwell in Borderlands, places of transition, where certainty collapses and familiar rules no longer apply. These are the forest edges where cultivated land gives way to shadow, the narrow mountain passes that separate valleys and peoples, and the old trade routes where strangers pass briefly through before vanishing again. They are liminal spaces, suspended between safety and danger, civilization and chaos. This detail is not incidental. In folklore, monsters born of borders are rarely just beasts. They are embodiments of fear. They represent the anxiety surrounding the unknown, the outsider, the figure who does not belong and cannot be understood. Psoglav, with its human body and animal head, becomes the perfect symbol of this tension, familiar enough to unsettle, yet alien enough to terrify. In times when borders shifted constantly between empires, kingdoms, and faiths, these fears were not abstract. A stranger on the road might be a merchant, a refugee, a soldier, or a threat. Psoglav absorbed those uncertainties and transformed them into a single monstrous form. It was the fear of the foreign invader, the lawless wanderer, the person who lives beyond the village's moral order and therefore cannot be trusted to respect human life. According to legend, Psoglav thrives beyond civilization, in places where laws do not reach and social bonds dissolve. It exists where no bells ring, no elders rule, and no gods are said to watch closely. To encounter Psoglav is not simply to meet a monster, it is to realize you have gone too far, crossed a boundary you were never meant to cross, and stepped into a world where humanity no longer protects you. In this way, Psoglav is more than a predator. It is a threshold guardian of horror, a living warning that beyond the edges of order, something waits that does not recognize you as human, only as meat. Beyond the borders of civilization, beyond law and protection, there is one act that marks the final collapse of humanity. In nearly every culture, it is the same unspoken line: cannibalism, and this is where Psoglav's horror truly begins. In Slavic folklore, cannibalism is not merely a crime or a sin, it is the ultimate rejection of the human world. To consume human flesh is to sever oneself completely from community, ancestry, and moral order. It is the act that transforms a person into something irredeemable. Psoglav does not simply violate this taboo, it embodies it. Legends describe Psoglav feeding on human flesh with an animal indifference that strips the act of all ritual or necessity. Some stories claim it tears into its victims raw, its iron teeth cracking bone and sinew alike, leaving behind remains so clean they appear polished. Other versions are even more disturbing, depicting Psoglav dragging victims back to its lair, where massive cauldrons hang over open fires, human bodies reduced to meat, prepared not out of hunger alone, but habit. The act is methodical, normalized, almost domestic in its cruelty. The creature's chosen victims deepen the horror. Psoglav is often said to prey on women and children, not because they are weaker, but because they represent continuity, family, future, and survival of the village itself. By consuming them, Psoglav does not merely kill individuals, it annihilates lineage and memory. Entire households vanish, leaving villages hollowed out by fear and silence rather than blood. This was never random violence meant only to shock. To early Slavic communities, cannibalism symbolized absolute moral collapse, the final step away from humanity, after which no return was possible. A cannibal could not be reintegrated, forgiven, or redeemed. They were no longer part of the human world. And this is why Psoglav is so deeply unsettling, because unlike dragons or demons, Psoglav is not an external force of chaos. It is a reflection of something that could begin as human, a figure who crossed a boundary once, then again, until nothing human remained. Psoglav is not just a monster lurking beyond the village. It is the warning of what happens when hunger, isolation, and moral erosion consume a person completely. Once crossed, there is no way back. If cannibalism marks Psoglav's complete break from humanity, then its dog's head explains why that break feels so profoundly wrong. In Slavic belief, dogs were never merely animals. They occupied a sacred, uneasy position between worlds. Dogs were seen as guardians of the dead, able to sense spirits long before humans could. They stood watch at thresholds, graveyards, crossroads, and the edges of villages, places where the living and the unseen brushed dangerously close. In some traditions, dogs even served as guides, leading souls safely from one realm to another. To harm a dog without cause was to invite misfortune, because dogs were believed to see what humans could not. By placing a dog's head on a cannibal's body, the Psoglav myth performs a deliberate act of inversion. It corrupts the guardian. Psoglav becomes a false sentinel, being shaped like a protector but driven by hunger rather than duty. Where a dog should warn the village of danger, Psoglav is the danger. Where a guardian should stand between the community and chaos, Psoglav turns inward, devouring those it was meant to protect. This inversion deepens the horror because it weaponizes trust. The familiar shape of protection becomes the face of annihilation. Some versions of the legend even suggest that Psoglav's dog head is not a punishment, but a revelation and outward expression of an inner truth. The creature no longer wears a human face because it has abandoned human responsibility. What remains is appetite, vigilance without compassion, and loyalty to nothing but itself. For this reason, many scholars interpret Psoglav not just as a monster of the wilderness, but as a social warning. It reflects the fear of corrupted leaders, false guardians, and those entrusted with power who instead exploit the weak. In small, tightly bound communities, survival depended on trust, on knowing that those who watched the borders, led the people, or guarded the young would not betray them. Psoglav embodies the nightmare of that trust collapsing. A protector who becomes a predator. A guardian who feeds on the flock. A familiar figure transformed into something that devours its own. And in that way, Psoglav is not only a creature of folklore but a reminder that the most dangerous monsters are often those who once stood watch at the gate. If Psoglav's dog head reveals the corruption of a guardian, then its distorted body reveals the cost of that corruption. The creature is not merely monstrous, it is physically wrong, shaped by imbalance and incompleteness that no natural being should possess. Across many versions of the legend, Psoglav is described as having only one eye, sometimes fixed in the center of its forehead, staring forward without depth or peripheral vision. In folklore, a single eye is rarely a mark of wisdom. Instead, it signifies narrow perception, the inability to see the world in full, to understand consequences, or to recognize others as equals. Psoglav sees only what is directly in front of it: prey, hunger, movement. Everything else disappears. The creature's single leg carries a similar meaning. Often described as metallic, skeletal, or unnatural, it gives Psoglav an uneven gait, lurching, dragging, yet relentless. In mythic symbolism, lameness frequently marks a being that is spiritually damaged or morally unbalanced. Psoglav's body moves forward but never smoothly, as if the world itself resists its presence. It advances through sheer force, not harmony. Together, these features create an asymmetrical body, a visual language deeply understood in traditional storytelling. Symmetry is associated with order, health, and belonging. Asymmetry signals decay, corruption, and exile from the natural world. Psoglav is not malformed by accident. It is shaped by the consequences of crossing boundaries that should never be crossed. This physical fragmentation reinforces Psoglav's most disturbing quality. It exists in a permanent in-between state. It is not fully beast because it walks upright and preys with intent. It is not fully human because it has abandoned language, empathy, and community. It is something caught between worlds, frozen in a grotesque halfway form that can never be resolved. And this is why Psoglav functions as more than a predator in folklore. It is a living warning, a body made into a lesson. It shows what happens when protection becomes exploitation, when hunger overrides morality, and when a being steps beyond humanity and discovers there is no path back. Psoglav does not evolve, redeem itself, or transform. It endures, broken, watching, hunting, After all the horror, Psoglav represents cannibalism, corrupted guardianship, and a body fractured by moral collapse. One might expect its defeat to require powerful magic, divine intervention, or legendary heroes. Yet folklore offers something far more telling. Psoglav is rarely destroyed by spells or sacred weapons. Instead, it is outwitted. Stories describe villagers and travelers surviving Psoglav not through strength, but through cleverness and restraint. The creature is immensely strong, capable of tearing through doors, crushing bone, and overpowering any lone human it encounters. But its single-minded hunger is also its weakness. Psoglav does not plan, reflect, or adapt. It pursues. This is where traps appear in the legend's deep pits concealed beneath leaves, narrow passages that limit movement, burning structures set deliberately as bait. Some tales speak of Psoglav being lured toward fires it cannot resist, only to be consumed by the very flames meant for warmth and survival. Others end with the creature tumbling into ravines or abandoned wells, its rage finally silenced by depth and darkness rather than steel. Deception, too, plays a central role. Psoglav can be misled by false paths, distracted by offerings, or drawn into repeating patterns it cannot escape. The same creature that terrorizes entire regions is undone by patience and foresight, qualities it no longer possesses. This detail is crucial. Psoglav is not portrayed as cunning or intelligent. It is brutal, relentless, and predictably driven by appetite. Its broken body mirrors a broken mind capable of violence but incapable of wisdom. And folklore makes this distinction very clear. Raw strength alone is not enough to survive the world. The myth teaches a quiet but powerful lesson. Civilization does not endure because it is stronger than chaos. It endures because it is smarter. Through cooperation, planning, and restraint, humanity survives what would otherwise consume it. Psoglav falls, not when confronted directly, but when it is led, patiently and deliberately, into its own destruction. In this way, the monster's defeat becomes the final warning of the tale. Those who abandon reason become beasts, and beasts, no matter how terrifying, are ultimately undone by the very thing they lack. After Psoglav's defeat through wit rather than force, the legend invites a broader question. Is this creature truly unique or part of something older and wider? Across Europe and beyond, stories of dog-headed beings appear again and again. Medieval maps and manuscripts speak of the cynocephali, mysterious dog-headed men said to live at the edges of the known world. Byzantine and Islamic travelers wrote of distant lands inhabited by canine-faced peoples, strange, unsettling, yet often described with curiosity rather than fear. In Balkan folklore, cannibal giants roam mountains and forests, devouring humans and existing far from the reach of law or faith. At first glance, Psoglav seems to belong among these figures, but the similarity is deceptive. Those other beings are usually distant, placed deliberately at the far edges of civilization, in imagined lands meant to define what Europe was not. They function as marvels, warnings, or curiosities, rarely as immediate threats. Psoglav, by contrast, is intimate. It does not inhabit the margins of maps, it inhabits the margins of memory. Psoglav is not a race, a tribe, or a people. It is singular, solitary, and personal. It does not come from a faraway land. It comes from the forest beyond the village, the mountain pass one must cross to trade, the road children are warned never to follow after dark. Its victims are not abstract travelers. They are neighbors, relatives, and entire households whose absence leaves a wound in the community. This is what sets Psoglav apart. It is not a myth meant to expand the world. It is a myth meant to contain fear, to mark the limits of safety, and to remind people where they belong. Psoglav does not threaten humanity as a whole, it threatens your village, your family, your future. In this way, Psoglav becomes more terrifying than any legendary race of monsters. It is not safely distant. It is not symbolic in the abstract. It is something that could still be out there, just beyond the last fence, just beyond the tree line, waiting where civilization ends. After centuries of whispered fear and local remembrance, Psoglav began to fade not because it lost its power, but because it became uncomfortable. The monster did not disappear by accident. It was quietly set aside. Psoglav never achieved the legendary status of dragons or demons for one simple reason: it was too close to home. Dragons lived in distant mountains, demons in hellish realms far removed from daily life. Psoglav, by contrast, lived uncomfortably near at the forest's edge, on the road between villages, in the spaces ordinary people passed every day. Its horror was not grand or mythic. It was intimate and familiar. Unlike other monsters, Psoglav did not represent an external enemy. It reflected human cruelty, the kind born from hunger, isolation, and desperation. It embodied moral collapse rather than supernatural evil. Worst of all, Psoglav carried an implicit threat that terrified communities more than any beast: the idea that the monster was not born different, but became different. Psoglav suggested that under the right conditions, anyone could cross the same boundary. As Christianity spread through Slavic lands, folklore was reorganized into clearer moral frameworks. Evil became easier to define. Demons, devils, and sinners replaced morally ambiguous creatures that blurred responsibility. Monsters like Psoglav, who did not fit neatly into heaven or hell, were gradually buried. They were softened, forgotten, or omitted altogether because they challenged a comforting division between good people and evil beings. But folklore never truly dies. It waits. It lingers in half-remembered warnings, in children's fears of the forest, in the instinctive unease felt at the edge of light and safety. Psoglav may have vanished from popular stories, but the anxiety it embodied, the fear of moral erosion, of corrupted guardians, of becoming the monster oneself, remains deeply human. And what is buried in folklore has a way of resurfacing when we need the warning again. Psoglav no longer stalks our forests, no longer leaves stripped bones at the edges of forgotten roads. Its name has faded from common memory, buried beneath saints, stories, and safer monsters. And yet, the fear it carried has never truly disappeared. Because Psoglav was never just a creature of teeth and hunger. It was a reminder of how fragile civilization truly is, how thin the walls are between order and collapse. When hunger overwhelms compassion, when guardians become predators, when survival eclipses morality, the distance between human and monster begins to vanish. The legend endures because it speaks an uncomfortable truth. Evil does not always arrive from distant realms or supernatural curses. Sometimes it grows quietly, step by step, in places where law fails, where isolation hardens hearts, and where desperation justifies the unthinkable. Psoglav embodies that moment, the point of no return, when humanity turns inward and devours itself. And so the dog still howls, not in the forests, but in our collective memory. In our fear of what we might become when the borders of civilization weaken and the old warnings are ignored. Psoglav survives not as a monster to be hunted, but as a question that lingers in the dark. What happens when the line between man and monster is finally crossed and no one is left to guard it?
Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe.